Imagine that you didn't need to know how to make 3D models. That all you had to do was just type something into a text box and it happened. Well, there are people working on that. And while I certainly have opinions about AI and art, I'm not going to worry about those right now. But I found this one called Luma Labs. And Luma Labs is doing interesting things. Now, interestingly, most of their models seem to be copyrighted characters, and they don't seem to care at all about that. So I suspect there will be some discussion about that coming in the future. But I found one that kind of intrigued me. It was a bust of Beethoven, and it says, Mozart, bust of Mozart in metal. Now, these models look not too bad when you're looking at them, but I downloaded this model and it came in an OBJ format, and then I brought it into Blender. And in Blender, you can't see it. It's too small. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it up by 100 times. That makes it a more reasonable size. But take a look at this. This model doesn't look anything like the model that they were showing. Why? What's going on? Well, what's going on is this is actually a textured model. It's made for like a video game. The base model is fairly low resolution, but then they put a pretty texture over it to make it look good. So like this collar right here in the just plain mesh, you don't see them. So I was immediately intrigued with this model, and I wanted to know, in fact, I'm pretty sure I'm capable of taking this model, the lights and the darks of it, and using it to displace the solid mesh and basically add that detail back in. Now, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be actually kind of very imperfect. For instance, this dark area underneath eyes, it's not going to be what we think it is. This is just going to be dented in. But overall, I think it's going to look pretty good. However, in the process of figuring this out and making this happen, well, I learned quite a lot. And I wanted to share what I learned with you guys. So let's jump into that right now. So again, the goal is to take this model and displace it. So we could really easily just go into the modifiers panel. Let's do this in solid view. First of all, we're going to add a subdivision surface modifier. That's going to add more geometry for us to work with, and that's going to be very important. Okay, so we've subdivision surfaced the mesh so that there's more points for us to work with. And now we're going to add a displace modifier on here. And for our displace modifier, whoops, I better first of all apply that scale that I did it to so it doesn't do everything times 100. But we need to add a new texture to it. Then we need to go into the texture tab and set that texture to be the image that we were seeing on the material displacement. But here's the thing. There's 0, 1, 2, 3 textures. Which one is the right one? Well, I'm just going to choose the first one. It's usually the first one. Oops, we got to go back to our modifier here and change our coordinates to UV coordinates. And then, well, it's already looking better. That is to say, without this, the mesh still looks kind of flat, but with this, we're starting to see some of what's going on with the eyes and the mouth. It's gaining some details as soon as this decides to pop back in when I click the right button. But it's kind of globby. And why is it kind of globby? Now, this is a problem that we see a lot with 3D scans. I'm going to turn this mesh off, this modifier. In fact, I'm going to turn all the modifiers off for just 1 second. And I'm going to go into my side-by-side view where I have it set up to look at the UVs. And take a look at the UVs here. So if we're looking at just the UV map, and let's select nothing, it's a bunch of tiny little islands right next to each other. And that is for 0, and then we can go to 1, and it's also a bunch of tiny islands, and then we can go to 2, and it's a bunch of tiny islands. This is not uncommon for 3D scans to work this way. This is the way computers kind of deal with the idea of adding meshes to it, and we'll look at it in material preview mode. But notice how if we zoom in on this, okay, obviously this island is working with this island of color, but then what are these islands, and why is this one here, overlapping them in weird ways? Well, that's because that island goes with, well, maybe not this mesh, maybe it goes with this one. There it is, that island goes with this mesh. So it is assigning these multiple textures arbitrarily, one of them here and one of them here and one of them here, and that's creating the splotchy. So what we're going to have to do is we are going to have to fix this mesh so that all 4 of these textures that are, like I said, put on there for video game reasons, are all in one material. And this requires knowing just a little bit about texturing and stuff. So let's dive into it. It's called baking a texture, and here's how it's done with multiple textures. There are better tutorials for this if you want to know about this in the general case, but here's how it works with this one. First of all, what we need to do is we need to come down to the, actually not the particle nodes, the object data, find the UV maps, and we need to create a new UV map. The UV map is what defines how these points mesh to these points, how they line up here. So what we're looking at here is this UV map. Well, we need to create a new UV map, and this one we're going to call baked, because we're going to bake this texture in. Don't think too hard about that. But now what we want to do is, instead of having part of this be for one mesh and part of this, we want one for just one mesh. So I'm just going to hit U, unwrap, and yeah, put them all on this. I don't even know what it, you know what? This was a terrible unwrap. So let's do it again, where let's just hit unwrap, and let's do a smart UV project. This one tries to break it into islands that make sense, but we're going to add just a tiny island margin here. If you do it 0, the different islands will be stuck together sometimes. But if you do it with just a tiny margin, they won't, and things won't interfere. This is much better. In fact, we can kind of see how the head shape is in here just a little bit. And this, I'm guessing, is the shoulder and neck. This is a smarter. It's not perfect, but at least everything's in one. Now what we need to do is we need to create, so let's X this out and create a new image. And we can create this any size. 1024 is probably big enough for this, but we're going to call this our baked image texture. That's fine. So now we got a blank image. So now what we need to do is take all of these textures, all of these multiple textures, and bake them into this one. And here's how that's done. First of all, we have to go over to the shading tab. And in the shading tab, this is all related to these materials. Notice there's one for each of these materials. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to, in the shading nodes here, and you know, this is the sort of thing that if you ever do 3D modeling for video games or for, you know, things that you render out, you'll get into this stuff. And I've gotten into this stuff. It's pretty fun. But for now, down here, this is one image that goes into the base color, and then all of this is calculated so that we can have, you know, metallic or reflective things, and it comes out in the final output right here. But to make this work, we need to add our baked texture in here, and literally all we have to do is add a image texture, put it in here, set it to our, and it's so tiny, it zooms it out so you can't see anything, but set it to our baked image right here, and then make sure that it's selected. And then we need to do that again for the rest of these. So actually what I can do is just come here, right mouse click on it and copy it. And then I'm just going to paste it in here and paste it in here and paste it in there. Now all 4 of these textures have the baked texture in it. It's not connected to anything, but it's selected and it's active. And that's all it needs. It's kind of weird how it works. Now we go up here, and actually let's do this in the main here. All right, Let's go to material preview so it looks good. Up here. Now in the, I believe it's render properties tab, first thing we need to do is we need to switch over to the cycles render engine. And for some reason, my cycles render engine, the first time I tried to do this, wasn't activated. And if it's not activated for you, it's an add-on. So just search for cycles and turn it on. So once I got that turned on, I had all these cycles options. And the one down here that we like is bake. Now, baking is like if you have light and environmental things, you can bake them into your textures for like video games so that you can have like textured walls that have lighting, but that doesn't have to calculate the lighting because it's baked in. We just want to bake in the color. We don't want the indirect. We want the diffuse color, and that's it. I think we're ready. Let's hit bake. And this is going to chew on this for just a little while, so let's fast forward to that. All right, the bake is done, and if we go back to our UV editing, we can see, there we go. We've got all of the textures into it. Boy, it lined it up weird. Why did they put his face upside down there? But never mind. So now, despite all 4 of these textures being here, we have an option to put them all together. So we're going to take that option. First thing, we're going to take our new UV and plug it in, and all of a sudden our UVs are all broken. That's because it's using this UV map, but with the old textures. So we need to go back and make those old textures gone. So we'll just get rid of all of them. Now I'm really quickly going to add a texture back in there and go over to shading, and we'll just add our baked image into here and then plug the color into the base color, and ta-da! Just like that, we've got our baked texture and everything's in the right place. But here's the thing, for 3D printing, we don't need this material. Why that becomes important is when we come over here, and now in our displacement, we use, instead of that texture, we fixed a texture so that it's using our baked texture, and we've got our new UV map. So now, hopefully, when we turn all of these back on, our subdivision surface and our displace, then there it is. Now again, it's not perfect. Remember, I made note that underneath the eye, it's just going to be sunken, and sure enough it is, but you know, kind of from a distance, it doesn't look too bad. The hair definitely looks way better. In fact, let's really quickly duplicate this, move it over, and let's turn off the modifiers on this second one so that we can compare them side by side. You notice how the hair on the new one looks fantastic. The old one just kind of looks flat. You know, those lines on the side of the nose actually kind of work to our benefit here. And we now have little divots in the nose that we didn't have before. We have lips that we didn't have before. Oh, the collar. Do you remember I pointed that out there? Now, again, it's just taking the white line of that and ridging it up. So it's just as much ridged on one side as it is on the back. But yeah, I feel like our brain makes up the difference here, and we end up with something that just looks much, much better. So let's take this, export it, throw it at the 3D printer, and see what comes out. So there we are, and obviously I printed this without the texture and with the displaced texture added to it. And I think that even in the 3D print, it's obvious that adding this displaced texture just added so much more detail, let alone in the hair, in the eyes. Now, I thought that this area here underneath the eye would be a problem because it's sunken in where it should be a little bit more flat, but under most lighting conditions, it actually works. I also thought that this color would be a problem because really it's just a raised line instead of being higher on this part and lower on this part. But again, under the lighting conditions, it looks more like color, and you can see that color a little bit better, especially on this side and around the back. So overall, this technique, while it's cheap, while it's quick, while it doesn't really exactly represent the way that this might have looked in real life, works well enough for especially something that you're just going to be sitting on your desk or shelf and showing off to people. Now, I do need to mention that this particular model, as I've been doing research about this Luma project that says that they're making AI models, I don't think they did. Or they might not have, or they're still working on it, and this particular one was not made by that model, or it was assisted with AI, but even so, there's some question in my mind whether this was an actual AI generated model. Now, the model itself it's got a lot of imperfections, and that makes me think that it was, but at the same time, on Luma, you can't make your own prompts yet. So I don't know whether this was AI or not. I was told it was AI, and I think it does represent what AI art is doing and will be doing going forward. And I think that there's some discussion to be had about it, but it's exciting and the idea of it is interesting. Well, I hope that that has, maybe helped some of you or at least entertained you for a little while. Thank you guys very much for watching. And always remember, you are a child of God and you're special. So take care of yourself. And if you can, take care of somebody else, because we all do need each other. Thanks for watching.